Welcome back, students. Now, in the previous video, we have been looking at the roles and functions of the office. So far, we have looked at productivity, the distribution and exchange of goods and services, and we have started to look at the collection, processing, storage, preservation of data and information. All right? So we're going to backtrack a little bit. Now, with the distribution and exchange of goods and services. Now, I have a simple chart which shows the process of inquiry, order, and dispatch of a good or service. Now, you may remember that when we spoke about the distribution and exchange of goods and services, we looked at how some large companies may have different offices that are assigned specific or specialized functions. So students, here we have a simple diagram showing the process of inquiry, order, and dispatch. All right, now let's look at a case study. Now let's say Mr. Brown is interested in a particular good. So he writes a letter or an email to the company requesting information about the product. This email will then be received by the sales team, who will then respond to Mr. Brown. All right? Now let's say Mr. Brown is impressed or satisfied with the response that he got from the sales team, and he decides, let me go ahead and order this product. Mr. Brown then, well, first he inquires about the product to the sales team. The sales team respond with a quotation. Mr. Brown is impressed. Mr. John is impressed, sorry. So he makes an order. So Mr. John orders the product. The sales team will then process the sales order and send this information to the accounts department. Now, the accounts department will examine the customer's credit worthiness in the event that the customer would be obtaining the goods on a credit. So they would check his credit worthiness. The information will then be passed on to the stock control department, which will then process the approved order and package and send the product to the customer, who is Mr. John. Now, Mr. John receives the good. He receives an invoice. He makes a payment, right? So the company gets its payment for the goods. Now, you will realize that after the stock control department sends the product to John, they then update the stock, right? So this is how information has to be processed in order to make sure that the company is operating effectively or efficiently. Once that is done, the accounts department will then update the customer's account and keep that information, which can be produced at a later date if required. All right? So this is just a chart to show how different offices in a business have to work together to ensure that the output or the good gets in the hand of the customer in the most efficient way possible. All right? So now let's look at why and how is information preserved. All right? Now, information is stored by businesses for several reasons. The main reasons are to keep records of day-to-day run-ins or activities of the business. There are several steps involved in getting the goods or service into the hands of the customer, as you can see from this chart, right? So there are several steps involved in getting the goods or service into the hands of the customer. And at each stage, documents are generated, all right? So we see where a sales order was processed, it was approved, and we see different stages. At each stage, documents are generated, right? It is very important that copies of these documents are kept safe, so there is record of every business transaction. All right? Now, businesses preserve information so they can plan and monitor resources for decision making. All right? They also preserve information so they can analyze the market in which they operate. They also preserve information so they can answer customers' questions or query about a specific order. So let's say a customer placed an order 2 years ago, or maybe not so long, a month ago, right? And the customer needs some clarity on his or her order. The business or the company would then have to be able to retrieve this information and present it to the customer, all right? So businesses also preserve information so they can evaluate its performance in any fiscal or financial period. They also preserve information for compliance with the law, and we're going to be looking at this as we progress. They also preserve information that in the event of a dispute with a customer or in the event of a potential legal action and they need to reproduce the information, they have it preserved. All right, so it's very important that business not only collect and process information, but they also have to preserve the information that they have gathered. All right? Now, there are several laws and regulations that specify which records a business must retain and the period of retention. Now, the period of retention, as the name suggests, is a time frame in which a business must hold on to or preserve or have safeguarded documents or records. All right? One such example is when businesses declare its earning for tax purposes. Now, the Inland Revenue Department, who is responsible for monitoring the country's revenue in, for example, taxes, right? So a business declared that it earns X amount of money over the last financial year. Now, a percentage of that earning has to be taxed. Now, the Inland Revenue Department may wish to check if the declared profits are correct. This may involve them examining all the records, all the books of accounts, and documents that relate to the company's income earned over that year. All right, so the Inland Revenue Department may just decide to, you know what, let's check to see that what you declared is actually what you made over the previous year or the year in question. So the business would now then have to retrieve all these documents, all these information, and present it to the Inland Revenue Department so they can check to verify that what the company declared as profit or what they made over the year and they paid for tax is actually true and correct. All right? Now, businesses must therefore establish document retention policy. And what this means is these are guidelines of what documents should be retained and for how long they should be retained. This ensures that documents are safe and meet legal requirements, and also that documents are stored for the appropriate length of time and protected and not disclosed to unnecessary or unauthorized persons. All right? Now, this policy should include a hard copy, or this policy can include hard copies as well as electronically stored documents. All right? Okay, now let's look at storage of information. Information stored in a business can be in the form of a hard copy file or on a computer server that is accessible by various members of staff who have various levels of authorization, right? Now, information on a server facilitates easy input and retrieval of documents and information. And we know this is true because computers are able to create ordered ways of archiving, storing, and retrieving files or documents. All right? Now let's look at electronic data processing, or EDP, right? This is a process that collects, stores, and analyzes data, thus converting it into useful information. We spoke about data and information. Data has very little meaning unless it's explained, right? So the process can be fully automated to record, store, analyze, manipulate, sort, calculate, and disseminate information, right? In a specified format. For example, ATM. Now the ATM, once you put in your card, your information is readily available. You can check your balance, you can withdraw money. So an ATM machine is an example of an electronic data processing mechanism. All right? Let's talk about manual data collection. Yes, businesses still use manual data collecting or data collection, right? It can be very time consuming and very labor intensive, as clerk must input data by using the keyboard of a computer or physically writing in books. Whichever way the clerk uses to capture data, the data must be properly, accurately recorded or captured and in a timely fashion. Once the data has been collected, it must be safeguarded to protect the information from being damaged, from being changed, or from being disclosed to unauthorized personnel. All right? So yes, companies still use the old-fashioned traditional way of manual data collection in some instances. Okay. This takes us now to the dissemination of information. Now, the objective of dissemination of information is to make the information available to the intended audience. Now, the term dissemination it simply means the distribution of information, right? Now, this distribution or dissemination of information can be oral or in writing, or it could be electronically, depending on the audience. So there must be established rules and procedures to guide the employee of a business so that the information that is disseminated or distributed about employees, customers, suppliers, and other business relationships is accurate and done in a timely manner. All right? All right, so information requested must be done so in writing. Dissemination of information regarding an employee or former employees would be done according to the policies and guidelines established by the company. This would include confidentiality while complying with legal requirements. Requests for such information usually come in the form of bank or credit institution or prospective employers and should be answered only by authorized persons in the Human Resource Department. So only persons in the Human Resource Department who are authorized to do so can disclose information about an employee, because some of these information are sensitive and should be kept confidential. So the HR department is the only authorized person to disseminate such information about an employee. All right? Lastly, let's look at organizational management and legal controls. Now, under this heading, the role of the office is to maintain efficiency, emphasis on efficiency, right? So one of the objectives of any business is to be operating efficiently, all right? That is, the office must coordinate all activities so that the business is able to operate seamless or efficient. This includes everything from receiving incoming calls and relaying them to the relevant departments so the customer can be dealt with in a satisfactory manner, to ensuring that the required supplies for efficient management is available when they are needed, right? So the organizational management includes everything that would cause the business to operate smoothly. All right? Some other functions of this of the office include assisting the business in becoming and remaining a good corporate citizen through compliance. Now, every good citizen has responsibilities that they must carry out. For example, as a citizen, you are required to pay taxes. True? Yes. The same is true about businesses. They are required to pay taxes. So in order for a business to remain a good corporate citizen, they must be compliant. All right? So if they're required to pay X amount of tax, they pay X amount of tax. All right? Implementing an effective complaint handling system. Now, let's go back to this example. Let's say Mr. John was not happy about something. Let's say when he got the actual product in his hand, he was displeased about something. He then makes a complaint. There has to be proper systems in place to handle customers' complaint, right? Because remember, our aim is to ensure that the customer is satisfied, right? This also is true in-house. Now, let's say there are complaints within the business. It is the business's responsibility to implement systems that will address these complaints so everything will run smoothly. All right? And finally, providing employees with the requisite training in using machine and equipment. Now, let's say the company is upgrading their machines. So they have imported state-of-the-art machines to carry out the production process. Now, with the introduction of new machines comes the challenge of operating these machines. The employers must ensure that the employees are fully trained in operating these machines because, let's face it, depending on the nature of the business, some of these machines they can cause serious damage to a person, or even worse, can be fatal if not operated properly. So the employers have the responsibility to ensure that the workers are fully trained in operating these machines. Now, this training could come in the form of in-house training, where they get persons to come in and train the employees, or they may have to go elsewhere to acquire this training. But regardless of how it's done, all employees should be fully trained in operating new machines and equipment. So the office has the responsibility of assisting and advising employees on their rights and responsibility in the workplace. Under legislations such as the Occupational Health and Safety Act, Holiday with Pay Act, Labor Act, and the Employment Act. So the office has the responsibility to keep up to date as it relates to legal requirements. All right? Now let's recap. Our topic is roles and functions of the office, and our objective was, what are the roles and the functions of the office? And we said the roles and the functions of the office are productivity, the distribution and exchange of goods and services, the collection, processing, storage, preservation of data and information, the dissemination of information, and the organizational management and legal control. Thanks for joining, and I hope you learned something.